So I got a comment asking my thoughts of the rawrr Mantis X against the Talaria XXX. Now this comparison makes a ton of sense. These are both top of the line $30,000-ish eMotos. I of course have the Mantis X. I came this close to buying the XXX a couple of months ago, but now that I have the Mantis, there's no need for me to have both. But that's not to say that the Mantis here is perfect. I do think generally it's better, and you guys will find out why in this video, but there is a specific pretty large area where the XXX does have a key substantial advantage. Okay, let's begin this video with the similarities. They have a lot more in similar than they are different. The price, technically the XXX, okay, I have everything. Technically the XXX is more expensive. I didn't check recently, but last time I saw it was $3,250. The Mantis X, and even $3,000. Then of course you have shipping, taxes to add on top of it, but that's pretty comparable between the two devices. Dunk. Somewhat surprisingly, the top speed is almost identical between these two bikes. Mantis X, speed limiter on 50 miles per hour. The XXX, the top speed is like 48 miles per hour. So technically this bike has the edge, but that shouldn't decide one way or the other. And you guys can let me know in the comments which bike is quieter. To me, based off of the videos I've seen, the XXX is kind of loud. But there is a difference in the transmission. This has an internal gearbox that then goes to the chain. And the XXX, it's a primary belt, secondary chain. But okay, let's talk about the differences now. I think one of the biggest ones is the comfort, both the seat and the suspension. Everybody complains about the seat on the XXX. It's narrow and it's stiff. Not very comfortable, although it is long, which is something I like. It allows you can either sit back or scooch up on the bike, whatever you prefer. So it has that going for it. But that's essentially it. In comparison, the Mantis I'm on right now, this seat here is magnificent. It's the benchmark to beat. Super wide, super long, and the padding here, you guys can see. It's the best. And this bike also has better suspension. I've been really blown away with the suspension on this bike. The shock in the rear, it's like a full-size dirt bike shock. It's not a bike shock size. Big difference there. But on top of the shock being literally twice the size on this bike compared to the XXX, the geometry is just better on the Mantis. And what I mean by geometry is the swing arm here and the angles of it. You can see here that the swing arm is just one piece, and the attachment point for the shock, it's very close to the pivot point, and it's not raised up super high. The further the shock is from the pivot point and the higher up it is from the wheel, the worse the geometry is for the performance and the amplification of the shock. So this setup right here, this geometry is as good as it gets for a bike without a linkage. And in contrast, here is the setup on the Talaria. You can see it's a little different, right? The shock gets higher up, a little bit further away from the pivot point. It's still decent suspension, but it's not amazing suspension like what we have here. So combining that with the seat, the Mantis, clearly the more comfortable bike to ride. And then the other big difference is the voltage. This, straight out of the box, 72 volts. The Talaria is stuck at 60 volts. So naturally, the performance, the zippiness, acceleration, right? This has the advantage. And I feel like with the Talaria and even like the Sur-Ron, it's very tempting to want to eventually upgrade it to have a 72 volt battery, which becomes very expensive. But where the Talaria pulls ahead a little bit is with the capacity of the battery. So the Talaria at 60 volts, 40 amp hours. When you multiply those two numbers together, This bike is 2,160 watt hours and the Talaria 2,400 watt hours. So the Talaria has more total energy in the battery pack, giving you a bit longer range. When you combine that with the fact that the bike is lighter, 125 pounds versus the 139 pounds of this bike, that's a 14-pound saving. It will give you better range, the Talaria. If you guys saw my range video, you would know that this bike gets pretty much an even 30 miles of mixed riding. So if I had to guess, the Talaria maybe more like 35 miles. Another major advantage, which we kind of just touched on, is the size. The Talaria XXX is a lot more compact, so it's 14 pounds lighter, but it's also more narrow than this bike. So the wheelbase, it's almost identical between the two bikes. That's the total length. Even the height, I think they're both 32-inch seat height. But the Mantis is a little bit wide, right? It's more of a chunky bike, and the Talaria, it's a lot slimmer. And that's important because it does affect handling. Usually a smaller, more nimble bike is just always funner to ride. But also in terms of getting away with riding it on the street as an e-bike, that does give the Talaria a clear edge. It's smaller and closer to the size of a bike versus a full-size dirt bike. And that leads me to the final key advantage of the Talaria and the main reason why I might consider buying it over the Mantis X. And that's the optional pedal kit. Due to the transmission and the way that the bike is configured, you can install a functioning set of pedals on the Talaria. If I had that bike with the pedals, any fear I had with the cops pulling me over would essentially dissipate. With the Mantis, however, I do look over my shoulder a lot to watch out for cops. I will say that I've passed cops a bunch of times so far on this bike, and I've had no issues. But it's just worth noting that the Mantis will never be able to accept a pedal kit because we have that gearbox, the transmission's a little bit different. There's just no way to add at least functioning pedals to this bike. So that's always going to be probably the biggest difference between the Talaria and this Mantis X. So you essentially have to weigh, do you want pedals and to be more comfortable on the street, or do you want 72 volts and a bit more speed and pep for the dollar spent? That's really the decision when it comes down to it. Leave a comment if you guys had an extra 3,000 bucks to spend on one of these bikes. Which option would you go for? I'm very interested to find out what you guys think on this topic. With that said, that's the end of the video. If you guys enjoyed, I always appreciate a like, subscribing, all that kind of stuff. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.